Good morning. My name is Sam. I am an alcoholic, and I'm also a son of recovery. Let's start out with the Serenity Prayer. Good and gracious God, grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, the courage to change the things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference. Amen. I'm reading through Recovery Dharma, How to Use Buddhist Practices and Principles to Heal the Suffering of Addiction. I'm going through the Eightfold Path right now, and I'm on the Mindfulness section. So, Wise Mindfulness. Mindfulness, being present to what's going on in our minds, bodies, hearts, and world, is central to the practice of the Eightfold Path. We learn to be present for the way things are with compassion, without judging them or ourselves. Mindfulness is being aware of whatever is present, noticing it, and letting it pass. It's also remembering that we're on a path leading to our freedom and long-lasting happiness. Mindfulness asks us to be aware and to investigate without the reactivity and grasping for control that leads to suffering. We learn to stay attentive to what's happening without having to either react to or deny what's happening. For many of us, our addictions prevented us from being mindful. In fact, that was often the whole point. We used our substances and behaviors to avoid feeling, to avoid being aware, because being aware was painful. But by trying to avoid pain, we often created more suffering. We're now making a different choice, to sit with the discomfort rather than pushing it away or trying to numb it. We can learn to sit with the discomfort in different ways, either up close and personal, saying this fear is simply a bunch of body sensations, or in a more distant, non-attached way, there's the fear, and I don't have to let it control me. We're choosing to respond to it with mindful investigation and compassion, and to trust that it will pass if we let it. We're remembering that there's another way to respond to life. Our minds can get lost in how we react to experiences. When something happens, we almost immediately begin to create a story, plan, or fantasy about it. We have a thought about an experience. That thought leads to another, and on until we're far from a real understanding of the experience itself. Mindfulness is noticing the experience in that moment before we get lost in the judgment of the moment or the stories we spin about it. Rather than blindly following our reactions and responses to an experience, mindfulness allows us the space to choose to respond skillfully and from a place of wisdom and morality. Mindfulness encourages us to be open and to investigate the painful experiences and our habitual reactions to those experiences, rather than to deny, ignore, suppress, or run from them. Most of us have been conditioned to be our own harshest critic from early on, especially during our fixations on substances and behaviors. We carry the shadow of that judgment with us, even as we seek recovery. Giving ourselves negative feedback and scrutinizing every effort we make, holding ourselves to impossible standards of perfection. Letting go of that inner critic allows us to be mindful in the present of the efforts we are making, mindful of the compassion and loving kindness we're learning to make a part of our practice in our lives. Remember that we often talk way more harshly to ourselves than we ever would to somebody else. It's useful to notice when we're treating ourselves too harshly, and then shift attention to what we are doing well. We can acknowledge the negative thought and then gently let it go. Sounds a lot like a gratitude list to me. Mindfulness practice is based on what are called the four foundations. The first foundation, mindfulness of the body, asks us to bring awareness, attention, or focus to breathing and to bodily sensations. Meditations on the breath and body are focused on this awareness. The second foundation is mindfulness of feeling and feeling tones. This practice involves noticing the emotional tone, pleasure or displeasure, that comes with every sensation, even when the sensation is a thought. It also encourages us to notice when the sensation is neither pleasant nor unpleasant, but feels neutral. For example, we can experience the sensation of breathing, the sensation of breathing in, the sensation of exhaling, by noticing where in our body we feel the breath most directly. But we can experience the sensations without feeling particularly pleasure in the sensations of breathing. Breathing is just there. It's a natural process of being alive. The second foundation instructs us to notice those sensations that are neutral, as well as those that are pleasant pleasant or unpleasant. The third foundation, mindfulness of the mind, asks us to notice when attachment, also known as greed or wanting, comes up, and to be aware that the attachment arises in the mind. We also learn to notice when the mind is not attached to a particular thought or sensation. Same practice of noticing applies when we become aware of aversion, which we can experience as resistance or even hatred. And when aversion isn't present in the mind, we notice that the mind is free from aversion. In the fourth foundation of mindfulness, mindfulness of mental objects or of mental phenomena, we begin to simply notice when a thought arises, being aware of it without judgment or evaluation, and allowing it to pass away without holding on to it and without creating a story out of it. Training in the fourth foundation lets us be aware of thoughts arising and passing away, and that each thought will pass if we allow it to. Two simple practices can make mindfulness more a part of our daily lives. First, we can stop whatever we're doing at any moment and pay attention to the physical sensation of 3 in-breaths and 3 out-breaths. This simple practice grounds our attention in what's present right now, rather than in the voices and critics we carry with us. Shifting from the stories and judgments we constantly create during the day to this simple grounding practice of 3 breaths gives us the space we sometimes need to return to mindfulness of the present. A second practice is to take time to inquire into the truthfulness of the negative or difficult messages we give ourselves. First, take time to ask yourself whether the message is true. Second, ask how sure you are that it's true. Are you absolutely certain about what may seem like an easy or automatic truth? Third, notice how you feel when you believe the thought. Does it lead to fear, anger, sadness, desire? Finally, reflect on who you'd be without the thought. How would you feel if you weren't caught up in the particular mindset or scenario you're creating? So that is mindfulness. And it is true. I know that I am definitely most often my harshest critic, and that I do need to go easier on myself. I do love breath and sensation bodily meditation, which is awesome. And the practice of 3 breaths, I do that often throughout the day. Like, I'll find myself in a moment and I'll think, like, okay, let's step out of this for a second. Let's get aware of what's going on. And I'll take 3 breaths, 3 in, 3 out, deep breaths, and then just kind of get mindful about how I'm feeling, what's going on. I mean, especially with the brain surgery 2 months ago, I have had to be very aware of how I am, how I'm feeling. Am I feeling exhausted? Am I feeling dehydrated? Am I feeling all sorts of things? Because I had to be very mindful of my mind and what was going on inside of my body. And it's going to be like that for a long time, having to be aware of those things. So mindfulness has been something that has been on my mind for a great deal of time over the past couple of months as it's been going on in my life. But I also love how they talk about shifting the stories we tell us and the stories we tell ourselves about moments that are happening. Because I know that, and people in my family have often said that we are exaggerators. We build a story. We are good storytellers. And trying to be mindful of making sure I'm sticking to the facts of what happened and not exaggerating things. So I love this. The shifting from stories and judgments we constantly create. Shifting from the stories and judgments we constantly create during the day to the simple grounding practice of 3 breaths gives us the space we sometimes need to return to mindfulness of the present. Because also, I know that we as alcoholics can tend to live in the future, and we can tend to live in the past really well, but we are rarely just present. And that is something that is talked about a lot in meetings, and I know that was talked about a lot in my early meetings. So, with that, tomorrow we'll be going on to Wise Concentration. And then we'll start on community. So, oh God, as the day returns and brings us a silly rounds of irritating duties, help me perform them with laughter and a kind face. Let cheerfulness overflow in my work. Give me joy during my business all this day. Bring me to my resting bed tired and content, and grant me the gift of sleep. Hope that didn't, sorry. So, sorry, my computer glitched for a second. If you have any thoughts, questions, or concerns, please, or comments, please leave them. And I hope you all have a blessed day. And with that, I will see you all later.